Hello, friends. This should be our lesson for Friday, April 4th. And this should be our last recorded one. So the next time we're in class together, I'll be there in person. So just like our last class, today we are going to be looking at some primary source documents. But rather than some visual primary source documents, we're going to look at some written primary source documents. And we're going to follow the same kind of format that we did last time. So you'll notice, again, primary source document one, written primary source document one, written primary source document number two, set of questions that go along with each one. So just like last time, I'm going to read through each of those, pause. You can pause me at any point and answer those questions as I guide you through them. You're going to pick which one that you feel would be most helpful to a historian trying to understand what occurred at the Haymarket Square riot, and then explain why you chose that document and why the other one might still be useful. All right, so for written primary source document one is the first one we're going to take a look at. All right, so please follow along. Please annotate with me as I go through. So background information on this document. Okay, on September 14th, 1887, the Illinois Supreme Court upheld the convictions of the Haymarket anarchists. So they appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court, trying to overturn their conviction. They lost. The Illinois Supreme Court sided with the state of Illinois, upholding those convictions. The national news magazine Harper's Weekly, the same one that we saw in the cartoon in our last class, the national news magazine Harper's Weekly very strongly favored that decision of upholding their convictions. So again, we see the magazine's bias against the anarchists. The passages below are from its October 1st, 1887 editorial, praising the state Supreme Court and explaining exactly why the Haymarket defendants were guilty, even though they were not directly linked to the bombing or to the bomb thrower. So why they would be guilty, even though they had no connection to the bombing or the person who threw the bomb. We still don't know who that person was. The first paragraph here refers to one of the convicted anarchists, Albert Parsons, who turned himself in on the day that the trial began. Okay. So I'm going to read through each of these paragraphs. Please follow along and annotate with me as I go through for the most important, helpful information, because then that'll help you to answer the questions that we go through. Again, I'm not going to give you the answers, but I will help guide you through. Okay. So Parsons surrendered himself for trial, unquestionably, because he supposed that the actual thrower of the bomb could not be identified, and therefore that no criminal connection could be established between the speeches and the writings and plans of the anarchists and the final act, the fatal act. The fatal act. That was the feeling of some other observers who have been inclined to think that the anarchists were really tried for their opinions, and in the event of their execution would be regarded as martyrs of free speech. But even upon the showing of the summary of the trial published by their own friends, it is almost impossible not to hold the anarchists legally and morally guilty of the crime. The meetings, the justification of the force, the appeal to force, so arguing that they should use force, the manufacture of bombs for a purpose, the call to arms after the riot at McCormick Factory on May 3rd, the determination to resist the police as myrmidons of bloody capital. Don't worry about that word. I didn't even pronounce it correctly. The Haymarket meeting, the harangues, the approach of the police, and the catastrophe, the bombing itself, are all inextricably connected. They're linked and are all steps toward the crime. So each of those are what components, each of those are dominoes that led all the way up to the bombing itself. Each of those shows that they are guilty, according to this editorial. Anarchy, the big idea, anarchy contemplates a forcible subversion of society, which must begin, if at all, in the very way that was adopted at Chicago. In the commission of such crimes, it is those who instill the idea in more ignorant minds, those who justify the deed, who point out the criminal means, and who inflame murderous passions to the utmost, who are morally guilty. So even though they didn't throw the bomb, even though they didn't produce the bomb, they're guilty for inciting violence, for leading somebody to throw a bomb. According, again, to this document, to this editorial. I'm not saying that's how I feel. I'm not saying that's how you should feel. I'm saying that's what the writer of this piece is saying. During the last 2 years, there has been enormous suffering among honest laboring men and women, produced by strikes under 100 pretexts. Now, is it the unhappy and terrorized men who have obeyed despotic leaders, or is it the leaders themselves who are really responsible for all the suffering and loss? The man who in every way incites forcible revolution is responsible when revolution begins. And if he be a courageous man, he does not shrink from the consequences. So think again about who this writer is saying is responsible for the bombing and what occurred, and the consequences of what occurred. Those who resisted the operation of the fugitive slave law, tying it back to what we talked about before the Civil War, and sought to save the innocent slave from torture and unspeakable wrong, counted the cost and endured the penalties. So even though they were fighting against a law that they disagreed with, right? They knew what they were going to be doing. They knew that there were consequences, and they were willing to take those consequences if necessary. They're connecting this revolution, this attempt at revolution, to the fugitive slave law and those who resisted that. Anarchists who justify and counsel murder as necessary to the overthrow of society, when murder begins in consequence of their incitement, cannot be held guiltless. In other words, the argument here is that they were guilty for those reasons. So just like before, let's use our notes to answer these questions. I'm going to read each question and provide any guidance as necessary. You can pause me at the end of each one to look back at your notes. So question 1. What main point does the editorial make about the guilt or innocence of the Haymarket anarchists? What main point does the editorial make about the guilt or innocence of the Haymarket anarchists? 2, from the document and the information on it, who do you think the audience for this editorial was? In other words, who was the writer writing for? Not just everybody, okay? But specifically, who do you think they were targeting? Who do you think that the readers of that magazine, given the bias that we looked at before, okay, who do you think the audience would be? What purpose do you think this editorial hoped to achieve? So what was the purpose of writing and publishing this piece in this nationally syndicated magazine? Number 3, we're looking at bias here. What 2 or 3 sentences, you don't have to quote them, okay? You can summarize. But what 2 or 3 sentences or phrases in the editorial best express its view of the anarchists? So how did the person who wrote it view the anarchists? What 2 or 3 sentences or phrases express the view of the ordinary workers? And you can summarize, no need to quote if you don't want to. And lastly here, question 4. What else can we infer? What is suggested or implied by this document? For example, what can you infer from it about overall business labor relations at this time? The relationship between the worker and the factory owners. What can we infer about the relationship based on this document, based on this editorial? What can we infer about the views of those who supported the Haymarket defendants or the defenders? Okay, so again, looking back at your notes, what inference can we make here? When you're ready, let's take a look at written primary source document number 2. Okay, so background information. Please read and annotate with me as I read with you, and then read and annotate as I read this with you as well. Okay, and then we're going to, just like before, use our notes to help us to answer these questions. So, written primary source document number 2. These passages below are from an editorial written by Michael Schwab, who was one of those convicted of inciting the Haymarket bombing, so one of the defendants. The editorial appeared in the Arbiter Zeitung on May 4th, 1886, the day of the bombing. However, it was written in response to the riot at the McCormick factory the day before, on May 3rd. So remember the timeline, okay? It was written, this editorial here was written in deep anger about the police actions, the violence that occurred on May 3rd. Yet it offers views that were often expressed by anarchists in general, including their views on the use of violence by workers. So think of this as an encapsulation of what anarchists viewed and thought. Keeping in mind that this guy is frustrated and angry about the police violence, but also connection to anarchism itself. Okay, this editorial was entered as a People's Exhibit 73 at the trial of the Haymarket anarchists. All right, so this was evidence used against them. So I'm going to read this document again. This was written by Michael Schwab, published on the day of the Haymarket bombing. Blood has flowed. It happened as it had to. Order has not drilled and disciplined her murderous hounds in vain. The militia has not been drilled in the street, fighting for mere sport. The robbers, who know best themselves what a mean rabble they are, who keep up their mammon, we can look that word up because I'm going to provide you with a definition, their mammon, by rendering the masses wretched, who make the slow murdering of laboring men's families their vocation, their job. They are the last to be afraid of directly butchering the laboring men. Down with the rabble is the watchword. Is it not a historical fact that private property has had its origin in acts of violence of all sorts? And shall the rabble, the laboring men, allow this capitalistic pack of robbers to carry on through hired assassins, the police, hired assassins, their bloody orgies. So think about what this person might be saying about business owners and factory owners versus the laboring men. Nevermore. The war of classes has come. In front of McCormick's factory, workmen were shot down yesterday, May 3rd, whose blood cries for vengeance, for revenge. Who will any longer deny that the ruling tigers are thirsting for the workman's blood? Countless victims have been slaughtered upon the altars of the golden calf amidst the triumphant shouts of the capitalistic band of robbers. One has only to think of Cleveland, New York, Brooklyn, East St. Louis, Fort Worth, Chicago, and countless other places in order to recognize the tactic of the extortioners. It is terror to our working cattle. But the laborers are not sheep. I'll say that again, but the laborers are not sheep. And the white terror will be answered with the red. The red. Do you know what that means? Asking this question, not expecting an answer. Very well. You will find out yet. Modesty is a vice of the working men. And can there be anything more modest than this 8-hour demand? Anything so simple as this 8-hour workday demand? Peaceably, the working men made it already a year ago in order not to neglect to give the extortioner opportunity to prepare for it. And the answer to it was to drill the police force and the militia to prepare to fight the working man and to browbeat the laborers who worked in favor of the 8-hour system, to suppress them, to put them down, to prevent them from changing that society. And yesterday, again, May 3rd, yesterday, blood flowed. This is the manner in which these devils replied to a modest petition of their slaves. Think about who the devil is, think about who the slaves are. Death rather than a life of wretchedness. If workmen must be shot at, well then, let us answer them in a manner which the robbers will not soon forget again. Is that a threat? Is that just saying I want to do something memorable? The murderous capitalistic beasts have become drunk with the smoking blood of laborers. The tiger lies ready for the jump. His eyes sparkle, eager for murder. Impatiently, he whips his tail, and the sinews of his clutches, his muscles and his hands are drawn tight. Self-defense causes the cry, to arms, to arms. If you don't defend yourselves, you will be torn in pieces and ground by the animal's teeth. Think about all, these are all these similes, these metaphors. Who's the animal? Who's being eaten by the animal? The new yoke which awaits you in case of cowardly retreat is heavier still and harder than the severe yoke of slavery as it exists now. That's the end of that piece from Michael Schwab. So like before, you can pause me here for your annotations, and let's take a look at written source 2 questions. Okay, so first, what overall point about relations between the business owners and the workers does this document make? So what's the overall point about the relationship between business owners and the workers themselves? 2, read the information provided with this document. So the background information that I read with you to start document number 2. How does that background information help you better understand the point of the document? So how does this information help you to better understand what Schwab wrote? 3, to better understand this document, what would a reader need to know about labor and industry? So what background information? Think back to our lesson from a couple days ago. Okay. What background information about what's going on in the country, what's going on in Chicago, do you think that somebody who is learning about this time period needs to know to understand this document? What would they need to know about the socialist and anarchist ideas, about what anarchist beliefs? Look back again, our notes on what we learned in the context, the background information, just a couple days ago on Tuesday. Question 4. The document seems to defend the idea of workers using force and violence in their struggles. What case does it make for this? So why does Schwab think that using violence is necessary? Do you agree with that? Why or why not? So do you think that this case is sound? Do you agree with what Schwab is saying, or do you disagree? Why do you agree or why do you disagree? And then 5, this document was used to convict the Haymarket anarchists. So it was used as evidence against them, to convict them, to prove that they were guilty. Do you think that that was fair? Keeping in mind when it was written, why it was written, the frustration that Schwab was feeling. Do you think it was a fair piece of evidence against them? Why or why not? And then could a historian use this document fairly? If so, how so? You can pause me here, answer those questions. And when you're ready, just like we did yesterday, I want us to answer this question. Which of these 2 primary source documents would be most helpful to a historian trying to understand what occurred at Haymarket on May 4th, 1886? Is it the first editorial in Harper's Weekly, or is it Michael Schwab's editorial? Which one do you think would be most helpful to a historian trying to understand what occurred at Haymarket Square? Pick one, check mark or check mark. And just like yesterday, after you have made your choice, I chose document either 1 or document 2 because blank. Why do you think it would be most useful to a historian trying to understand what occurred at Haymarket Square? And then I did not choose the other document, either 1 or 2. However, a historian still might use this document to understand what occurred in the following way. Why would this still be useful to a historian trying to understand what occurred, either before, during, or after? All right. At this point, we've gone over everything. So you can pause me here, and I'll see you in person next time we meet.